Okay. It's 11 o'clock.
Hey, he's talking now.
Thank you, John. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm not sure how long. This is the first time I've given this talk, so I'm not sure how long it's going to run. So, hi. This is Secret Diary of a Small Perl Shop. I'm Chris Prather. If you don't know me, I'm Peregrine on just about everything. And what I'm not Peregrine on, I don't actually use anymore. So, I own a small company called Tamaru. How many people have heard of Tamaru? More than I thought. Awesome. And yeah, this is about Tamaru's about 3 years old this fall, and this is sort of a talk about running a small Perl shop and what I've learned. We deal mostly with small shops and consultancies and startups. And basically the first thing that I learned, running a business sucks. Don't do it. If you can avoid it. It's basically taking everything you've done in your career and starting over. You have a whole new set of things that you're going to learn. And everything that you knew before, all of your natural instincts that you've learned as a developer, are pretty much wrong. You're going to fail. Can we kill the lights up in the front? Because I'm having a hard time seeing my own slides. Thank you. Is that better? You're going to fail. You're going to have a hard time at something. It's inevitable. Basically, you're starting over on a whole new career path. And just like when you were starting out as a developer and you failed, you wrote the really crappy template system that you're embarrassed to show anybody now, or the really, really crappy ORM that you still support, but you don't want to have your name on anymore. You're going to have those same problems as a Perl, as a business. You're going to run into things that you wish, I wish I'd never done that. But the only time you really truly fail is if you fail to learn from those things. The goal is not to avoid not doing them, because that's impossible, but to make sure that you learn something from them. So basically, businesses are test-driven development. You try something, it blows up in your face, you say, okay, that didn't work. What did I learn? You move on. The biggest reason things fail, causality is a bitch. You never really know why things happen. Computers are really easy to understand. When you have a computer, you put in garbage, you get out garbage. We spend a lot of our time giving ourselves some form of Asperger's syndrome to understand how computers work, because they're so not like people, and they're very well-defined in rigorous environments. Business isn't. For example, trying to do marketing and figure out why people come to a new business, you can do all the right things and people still won't show up. And the reason why people won't show up is because of something you didn't know about on the other side of town. Like, a dam went out and washed out a bridge that you didn't even know that existed. So your event in that town, just failed and you didn't know about it. There's no way to know what works and what doesn't. All you can do is sort of statistical analysis after the fact. Basically, business is too complex to model discreetly. Business is other people. So you're going to have to be nice. You're going to have to deal with people you may not want to associate very well. You may have to deal with situations where you have customers screaming at you for something that's not even your fault. When I was preparing the slides for this, there was this story about a guy who builds tables. They're a wood manufacturer, and he builds these big professional conference tables. And he had this table that was a $50,000 conference table. And the customer had very specific needs, and it's a big Fortune 500 customer. And the CEO of this big Fortune 500 company was personally involved in buying this table, which says that the CEO had too much time on his hands. And says something about the state of our Fortune 500 companies. But It was a tight deadline. He worked very hard. He thought he'd done a great job. He delivered the table. They get the table delivered, all set up. A week later, he gets a call. Something's wrong with the varnish. It's not working. You've given us a crappy table. And he's like, well, did you do all of the stuff that I sent you in the care packet? We put down placemats, we put down coasters, we did everything you told us to do. It's a crappy table, replace it. And he's like, well, he talked to his guys, and they're like, no, we did everything, we did it all right. We did it the way it was supposed to be done. And he flies out and he looks, and there's nothing wrong with the table. But they're insisting, no, look closer. And he gets up closer. There's nothing wrong with the table. No, look closer. He gets up really close, and there's some subtle scratches on the table. And they look like normal wear and tear, but the customer is really upset. And so he's, well, did you, what, we can take care of this, but, what's going on? And he realized at that moment that it didn't matter whose fault it was. He was going to just have to take care of it. And so he figured out how to get the table back, get it, within his budget to fix the table varnish and get it redeployed. But he needed to figure out why these scratches had appeared so that this customer wouldn't be replacing tables every week. And it finally turned out that they had gotten mugs where they sent them to a local potter to have them reglazed, and the local potter hadn't bothered to reglaze them properly. And so they had scratches on the bottom of the mugs, which were scratching the table surface, which was something that he specifically asked them, did you do this? And they said no. So even in the table business, they have crappy users. But as a business owner, you have to weigh is this person's business worth my time and effort? As an open source developer, sometimes you can say, I'm not going to deal with your bug. I'm just going to say won't fix and close the bug. As a business owner, if it's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and a $50,000 table, you can't always say won't fix, even if it's their fault. So if business sucks and you don't know what you're going to, and you're going to fail, and you don't know what you're going to do, you can't really measure anything quantitative because it's all up in the air. And even if you can measure it and figure out exactly what happened, you may still have to suck it up and deal with it anyway. What can you do to deal with all of this? What can you do going forward? You can do, less than you think, but more than you probably realize. The biggest problem with being your own boss is that asshole boss you have is you. So you can't tell yourself to go, stuff it, because you don't actually listen to yourself very well. So what can you do to deal with the situation so that you don't drive yourself crazy? One of the first things, know what you want. Know why you're in business. What's your goal? Is your goal to make a lot of money? Is your goal to have a lot of freedom? Is your goal, I don't know, what are some reasons people came to this talk today? It can't just be because everybody loves me, so that's why you're here? Okay. Well, John's here because he loves me, but figure out how not to fail. So one of the reasons I'm in business is I hated working for other people. I hated not being in control. And I wanted to change that. But you need to have clear goals. And not only about why you're in business, but you need to have clear goals about how you're in business. When you start saying things like, okay, if I'm dealing with a $50,000 table, $50,000 is okay, I'll refund that. But a $12,000 table, they can go stuff it. Clear guidelines and rules about how things happen. It's the only way to keep yourself from going insane with things changing constantly around you. And you need to make sure that they're clear. You need to make sure that the customers understand these are the rules. So when you make an exception to the rules, they understand how special that is. And when you don't, you have the rules to stand by. You need to make sure your employees understand where the clear guidelines are. And you need to have, before you start business, you need to have measurable goals for success. How are you successful? Because I'm in business for myself, and my goal is to stay in business for myself. Success for me is a really low bar. I just have to make my rent, feed my kids, and pay my payroll for my employees. Other people, if you want to become super wealthy in the next, Bill Gates, you might have to have a slightly higher bar than I do. And you need to know what those goals are and constantly be thinking about them. You need to learn about money. Chromatic and I were talking about this yesterday. Money's really a hard thing to grasp. It's a fluid, and most people don't think of it as a fluid because it's all about cash flow. The money comes in, the money goes out, and maybe you can keep a little bit of it in between. But most of the time, the money comes in and the money goes out. You need to learn about how cash flows and projections and budgets and all of that stuff work. It's different from how a household budget works, where you know that you're going to have this pool every month that you can spend. You need to know more about, I know that these streams are going to be coming in, and I know that these streams are going to be going out, and I need to make sure that there's enough pressure coming in to fill the pressure going out. The more you know how to channel money, the Wall Street banker type channel money, the more tricks you can use to make sure that those ends meet. I'm not suggesting people go out and create reverse derivatives or anything like that, but it helped and it worked for them to some extent. And don't, and in that vein, don't be afraid to borrow money. Sometimes borrowing a little bit of money right now to solve this problem is cheaper than paying for it later. You see it with houses. You buy a house, you borrow a whole bunch of money up front, and hopefully that house will become worth more later. It hasn't worked so well recently, but these are the things to learn. Along this vein, you want to be frugal but not cheap. The difference for me is I won't buy a lot of stuff. We don't have an office. Tamara is a virtual company, partly because I live in one time zone. My business partner lives in another. The developer lives, our system administrator lives in a third city. So there's no point to having an office. But sometimes it'd be nice to be someplace other than my kitchen table when my kids are screaming and I'm trying to be on a business call. But that's not something that really would add value to my company, so I don't spend money on that. But when it comes to a server, I'll buy a higher end, more top of the line server because I know we'll grow into it, and I'll spend a little bit more to make sure that I get quality hardware. My laptop, I bought a nice laptop 5 years ago so that it would last me 5 years. There's this great quote, and I wanted to find it, and I couldn't find it, from a Terry Pratchett book about one of his characters had just recently married into wealth, and he'd been poor all his life. And he realized that the reason that his wife was wealthy wasn't because her family was rich, even though they were. It's because the stuff they bought never wore out. They only had to buy it once, and then it stayed in a closet forever. And it was a weird realization. And that's the difference. If you buy nice things that last longer, that's frugal but not cheap. Hire good people. This is another case. How many people have seen like Stephen Little's talk about hiring, or Mark Keating's talk earlier about embracing your community? A couple people. If you don't get a chance to, go to the Presenting Perl website and see Stephen's talk, his keynote from Perl Oasis a couple of years ago, about how it's a sort of a love letter back to the community about how he goes about hiring. Or check out Mark Keating's talks about embrace your community. They spend a lot of their time working in the community so they can find good developers to work with. Because they know that their business is made up of the people that they can sit in the seats that they can trust to do a good job. This was also part of the conversation Chromatic and I were having yesterday. If you're a consultancy, your business is those people. Their time sitting in those seats working on that code. If you're not a consultancy, if you have a product like a software service or something like that, you have a little bit more buffer for dealing with a bad hire, but it's still, if somebody screws up your code base, you're still going to spend a lot more money unscrewing your code base than you would if you just spent the time up front making sure you had better people. And the community, being part of the open source community, is a whole new advantage for a company like Tamaro, that we can participate and find developers and system administrators that we know have the skills that we want and have a personality that fits with our company. And sometimes they get hired away, and we keep them on our radar to have, to hire later in the future. And sometimes, and they'll come back to us. And sometimes they don't, and we get to snap them up and be able to move forward. And there's not really any other venue that an employer and an employee has where they get to try each other out without buying. So, take advantage of that. Charge a fair price. A fair price is the price that you need to stay in business. A lot of people tend to undersell themselves. I know I do. I tend to set my prices way too low. Part of the understanding cash flow and budgeting is so that you know what a good price is. Because a fair price is the price that you stay in business so you can keep providing whatever service or product you provide to your customers. Because if you go out of business, they're now screwed trying to find somebody to replace you. So it's not fair to them for you to sell it cheaper so that you get more customers. So you need to understand how pricing works, which it's a black voodoo and you really won't do it, but you need to try. And to understand how pricing works, you need to understand your costs. So that I reinforce that whole understand how money works. And don't fall in love, which is sort of counterintuitive. I became a developer because I loved to program. It was the thing that I can imagine myself doing for the rest of my life. I became a business owner because I also fell in love with becoming a business owner. It was the thing that I could imagine doing if I wasn't a developer. And it was the thing that I imagined doing more than I imagined being a developer. But if you fall in love with a specific product or a specific feature or a specific person, sometimes that blinds you to that person not working out or that product feature not working out. And you need to go with your heart but verify with your head. And make sure that you're willing to sacrifice some of your sacred cows for the success of the business. And sometimes, actually quite often, the sacred cow that you sacrifice is your own pride. You have to suck it up and tell the CEO that you're going to replace his table even though it's his fault. And, sorry, it's your fault that this is this is broken, but I'm not going to tell you that you're an idiot. I'm going to swallow my pride and say, yeah, no, we'll take care of it. It's okay. And you go and do that. And refactor. Constantly evaluate everything that you're doing in your business. Every piece of your business can be refactored and made and improved and made better. And maybe you don't fix it today. Maybe it's something that comes along 6 months from now or a year from now. But as long as you're constantly refactoring your business, you can always make it better. And there's always something else that you can sacrifice to improve. So I guess at the end, why do it at all? I think I've tried to make clear that after 4 years of doing this, and people may not have noticed, I've been gone a lot for this conference because I've been working on production outages all week and for the last month. the only reason I do it is because I can't imagine doing anything else. It's, the reason I stay in business is because if I wasn't, I'd feel, like I let something go. So that's it. Any questions? Mm-hmm. So the suggestion, and for the people at home playing the home game, the suggestion is to talk about how to set a fair price and how people like myself set a price. Don't do it the way I did it. Because I started out thinking, okay, well, this is roughly how much I need to make, and this is how much other people make, and this is a good number. And that number was way too low. Way too low. Because I didn't take into account all of the costs of what it would take to run a business. Well, there's a formula that I found online that I should put into some future version of this talk. That's basically figure that there's 250 work days in a year, at least in America. There's 250 work days because you want to take 2 weeks vacation, and there's some holidays and weekends and stuff like that. Because if you weren't running your own business, you don't want to have to work weekends. That would suck. It does. So figure you're only going to work half of those. So you're going to get 125 billable days in a year. Figure out what your annual salary that you need to make as a company times how many developers you have in your, how many people you have in your company, and divide by 125. And that's how much you have to make per day. And that's roughly where you start. And then you add about 25 to 30% on top of that to cover, oops, that took a lot longer. And that's how, that was one suggestion that I found from freelancing on how to set a price. Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to announce it here. I'm willing to share that number.
Right. So, and the upper bound, that's part of the causality is you don't know. You don't know why people value your service versus somebody else's. And the reason we, developers especially, I think, undervalue ourselves is because we have almost low self-esteem. We undervalue ourselves naturally. We don't think we're worth as much as we are. And really, kind of the way you do it is you start charging numbers until people start going, really, how much? And then once you hit that, you've met the upper bound.
Sending a signal to people who are doing this with me and it wasn't working. And it's one of these bizarre things that feeds into this really bizarre feedback loop that part of people's evaluation of what you're worth is what you're charging. And so, like, what I found is if I charge people, I said, no, I was living in a cheap, very little college town, low rent. I said, if I charge $5 an hour, I couldn't get work. If I charge $100 an hour for the same work, people were lining up. And I don't get it. I don't think it works. It's a little way.
comment was that sometimes charging more means that you get more business because it sends a valuation signal. And this was actually, there was some exercise equipment that they found the same thing, that they charged too little. They doubled the price and they sold out of it. They couldn't sell it at all to begin with. Double the price, sold out.
If you don't value yourself, other people aren't going to find value.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we found.
I think we're a little over time, but I'm going to take one last.
Actually, I have sort of a two-parter. You can pick one. Just your comments on business focus, your groups, the people you know, your technical specialty, and getting distracted and whatnot is a business issue, and or as a business, how do you scale? I mean, you said your bar is here, but to what extent do you need to scale to survive as a business?
So, how do you scale, and how do you know if you need to scale? You need to scale, because if you're not growing, there's a biological term for not growing anymore. They've been using it for Perl for a couple of years now. So you need to be growing in some way. You need to be heading towards whatever your clear goal is for your company. If you're not moving forward, you're stuck. How do you scale? Well, there's really two ways to scale if you're a company like mine, a consulting company. You either add more people or you raise your price. And which one you decide to do is up to you. Can you handle managing more people? Then adding more people is probably easier. Can you handle telling people a higher price and watching them go, I'm sorry, how much? Then maybe that's your solution. But that's pretty much it. So, thank you.